Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I wanted to mention some important points with regard to the way that education was done in Timbuktu and the way that it was done in Andulus. One of the things that is extremely important to understand is that within the Timbuktu system and within the educational approaches in Andalus, that there were a number of different sciences that were taught. Sciences that pertain to understanding revelation, understanding the creation. And so there was a worldview that came out of that type of educational system. It was one in which what you found was a curriculum that was interdisciplinary. It was not just focused on the sciences which pertain to the Quran and the Sunnah directly, but focus on other sciences that indirectly pertain to the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it's history or biology or chemistry or even psychology outside of the realm of spirituality. In other words, there's an aspect of psychology which overlaps with spirituality, and then there is an aspect of psychology that overlaps with the health of the body overall. And so a lot of that way of thinking, the interdisciplinary approach, was lost. And that's part of the crisis that the Muslims are facing today, is not having an approach to knowledge which is interdisciplinary and which really expresses an Islamic set of positions which with regard to what we think about the world and what we think about ourselves and how it is that we practice the deen. That's important to understand. A lot of people, when they think about Islamic sciences, immediately their minds go to usul al-fiqh and aqidah and hadith, and that's it. And they don't even include the Arabic language. They don't include any other sciences. And it's factual and based in the thinking of the ulama of the past that Islamic sciences consisted of two branches of knowledge. That which pertains to knowledge which is transmitted, and that goes back to the knowledge that is rooted in helping us understand the Quran and the Sunnah, and then that which is considered to be rational, so to speak, and that goes to either pure reason or practical reason. And so that gives us all the other sciences, including things like mathematics, and I mentioned some of the others, biology, ophthalmology, and medicine, and everything. But when you look at, for instance, the loss of that type of curriculum, it has opened up to a lot of insanity when it comes to understanding and functioning in the world. You know, some of the opinions that the Muslims hold in today's time would be considered completely unfounded and backward if you were to pose those opinions to Islamic civilization. You know, even if we were to pose it 700 years ago or even 500 years ago, some things are just problematic. Even though Al-Andalus was suffering, its demise during that time, and Timbuktu was coming under assault. And that caused the scholars of Africa, West Africa, Timbuktu in specific, to go underground. And it's only in recent times that a lot of those manuscripts which indicate that Africa had a written history, or that Timbuktu or that Islam had a great impact of positivity on Africa, is only recently that those types of writings have come about and people have reoriented themselves to really understand what's going on as far as civilization is concerned, or the knowledge base or knowledge orientation of Muslims. I wanted to make this last point and then close on this issue. That type of understanding and that I just mentioned with regard to knowledge, that it branches out into two types of knowledge. Imam ibn Khaldun rahmatullahi alayhi in the Muqaddimah, he talks about that. He has a section that just deals with knowledge. And he talks about the different types of knowledge. And Imam Ibn Khaldun was a little different than Imam al-Ghazali in that point. Imam al-Ghazali, he had branched knowledge out into that which pertains to the dunya and that which pertains to the deen. And that's kind of, Ihya Ulumuddin, and then you begin to see how he talks about fiqh. Fiqh is a knowledge that pertains to the dunya. He sees it as that way for various reasons, and there's a logic to that. I don't want to get into that so much, but I just wanted to emphasize the point of Imam ibn Khaldun, that the classification system that I was using was coming from his thinking in the Muqaddimah. And the reason why is because sometimes, there's things that I may mention that may come from ulama, and I may not mention the source directly to simplify the process. But, along with that type of thinking, that there's knowledge that is transmitted, knowledge that's rational, we find, for instance, Imam al-Balkhi. Imam al-Balkhi may have some controversy surrounding him, but there's no doubt that he has come into our attention in recent times, given that his manuscript that pertains to the issue of mental health was translated into English by Dr. Malik Bedri. Part of it was translated and actually is available in complete or in total in Arabic. You can find the PDF online. And in that manuscript, he talks about physical health. In the manuscript, he talks about physical health being tied into mental health. And I wanted to add another dimension. Shaykh Islam Ibn Taymiyyah has a book that talks about spiritual diseases. And there's a section there where he talks about the removing of certain diseases from the heart. But he talks about that in a language which sounds like medicine. It sounds like medicine. And so I wanted to bring the example of Imam al-Balkhi and even what Imam Ibn Taymiyyah was doing and frame it out back into what we were talking about, what we were kind of seeing within Timbuktu and Andulus. And sometimes this is the problematic that we find in today's time, that scholarship is not really understood. So people present knowledge in a way which really is not in sync with the spirit of the scholarly background or backdrop, in which some is limited in his orientation. And so, for instance, I wanted to bring the whole point back to, I wanted to bring Imam al-Balkhi's thinking and lock it into where Ibn Taymiyyah is at, and the issue of spiritual diseases. One of the things that is important to understand is if you look at the sequence, there's like Imam al-Balkhi is talking about physical health. Ibn Taymiyyah is talking about physical health too when it comes to spirituality. But Imam al-Balkhi is talking about mental health, right? And then Imam Ibn Taymiyyah is talking about spiritual health. So all of these things are interconnected with one another. It's important to understand that we've lost that. And even if we talk about 20 years in this country, 20 years ago in this country, especially within the African American community, Islam, this part of Islam was extremely well known, so to speak. The issue of physical health, the issue of having a base for taking care of yourself. I remember in Philly, prior to a lot of what you see today, because today the Muslim community has its own issues. But prior to, one of the key points in dealing with Muslims that you would encounter is this whole issue of a healthy living. A knowledge of herbs, a knowledge of health of the body, knowledge of foods, eating right, the whole practice of fasting, whole practice of clean food, clean water, all of that. That was part of the practice. That's at least how I was introduced to Islam. That was a fundamental practice. And that's true. We find that in Tib al-Nabi. We find that in the books of Tib al-Yunani and so on and so forth, which is mostly practiced in today's time. in the Indian subcontinent. Although, from what I hear, there's also some healers that are in China from the Muslim community as well, and maybe smatterings of other people in different places. But I want to definitely close by saying that, our spiritual health and our mental health, it is definitely tied into the health of our bodies. If we're drinking lead-ridden water, which majority of the water in this country has issues, that's not going to. Of course, we're going to feel lethargic. Of course, we're going to feel disoriented. If we're eating bad foods, it's the same thing. Of course, we're going to have issues. Most of the food in today's time has the deficits in it when it comes to vitamins and minerals. So, of course, we're going to have issues. Emotional issues come from, a lot of times, imbalances in the body, in addition to trauma and other things, and not having a disciplined orientation or not addressing certain imbalances that are there. Right. And so just like there's emotional health and there's mental health, there's physical health, there's also spiritual health. All of those things are tied in together. And we don't see those tie-ins. Unfortunately, we don't see those tie-ins because the way that we are understanding Islam is not within the framework of how the ulama understood it. There's some things from the colonial period that are extremely problematic. And there's other things that, we work through. But there's some things that we have to understand about the pre-colonial period that still are valid for today's time. And one of those things is that holistic overall framework that deals with interdisciplinary studies, because that ultimately is what's going to help us understand the whole issue of the revival of Islamic civilization, and help us to understand how to navigate beyond just the basic points of ibadah and beyond just the basic points of aqidah. Help us navigate on multiple levels and have that proper framework. And in this country, this was fundamental. Like, one of the things that was taught, I remember one of the first books that I had gotten when I was an early Muslim, it had to do with the Muslims and the sciences. The Muslims and the sciences, and that was talking about like medicine and other things like that. And we've completely lost it. People think, just being a doctor and that's sufficient, and that's not the case. What kind of doctor are you? Are you a doctor with the world view of the Muslims? Or are you a doctor with, that considers the body to be separate from the mind, and, that is separate from the whole issue of health, is the issue of thinking, is the issue of food? And because that's not the way that the Muslims have seen things. There may be advancements in today's times, but we look at things in a holistic way. The human being is tied back to the environment. Just like, we see that in some places, like in Midwestern states, if you have a vitamin D deficiency due to the fact that the weather stays gloomy, so to speak, in a lot of these places, that is going to affect your physical health, and it's going to definitely affect your mental health. And those things combined are going to affect your spiritual health. You're fighting against the grain, so to speak. And that's the note that I wanted to leave on, that, we have to look at these things in a holistic way. And the more that we do that, the more easy it is to practice Islam. When we have imbalanced understandings of Islam, we do a detrimental service, so to speak, if that's even possible. In other words, we engage in self-destructive practices. We have to have a balanced understanding of Islam in light of the different sciences and principles, in order to be able to come to a knowledge of ourselves that is healthy. If not, we will continue down this trajectory that we're in, and it's not a healthy trajectory that we're in. It's one in which, we a lot of us are lost. Even though we have the fundamentals of Aqidah, we're lost on a lot of other levels of how to function. And you see it, and it comes out in certain situations. It begins to manifest. People are having crises situations. There's marital issues. There's communal issues. There's a lot of issues that are there that are problematic. And they're problematic because our knowledge of Islam is limited. It's not holistic in its approach, and it's not related to our reality. And it's not 100%, fault for anyone, but it's the job of those who know to teach. and it's the job of those who have the wealth to support. And so the issue is that we're stuck in a retrograded, civilizational model, and that's on a lot of different fronts. And that's the note that I wanted to leave on. The Islamic civilization is extremely balanced, and sure, there's some things that still have to be researched and, adapted and evolved, but there's still a framework there that's viable to operate from. And so one of those things that we benefit greatly from when we study the writings of the scholars of the past is to have an understanding that spiritual health is heavily rooted into physical health, is heavily rooted into mental health, and in order to achieve those things, it requires of us a mastery of different sciences. The point of the mentioning or accenting the Islamic civilization is that in the past, those sciences had at the core the centrality of Tawheed. But, when you remove them, you start going in different directions, right? And so the Muslims were hip to a lot of things, in the past. They combined Chinese medicine with Indian medicine, with Greek medicine, with whatever was there foundational in the Sunnah. And that became the orientation of the Muslims towards medicine. And a lot of that medicine had to do with all of the phases, but I mean fads in that sense. What you're seeing in today's time, you see this health craze. You see people are focusing on organic food. They're focusing on teas. They're focusing on exercise. That's a lot of what was being taught, homie. At the end of the day, a lot of that stuff is what was being taught, in even in Ibn Sina, as much as there's some Aqidah issues there, but still in the books of Ibn Sina and others, that's what was being taught. Physical health, this and that. It's modernity which came and separated us from those foundations that were beneficial to our health. And we were left with nothing to contribute to our health in the real sense, except being told you have to purchase health insurance so that if you get sick, you can go to a doctor. But in reality, the doctor doesn't even know what's going on in your body. The doctor is just treating emergency medicine in that, which is a deviation from the norm, like, broken bones is part of emergency medicine, or that which is obvious. But a lot of us have stomach issues, we have gout, we have this, we have that. And those things fundamentally are treated with, food, food therapy. And so, I want to definitely end on this note because I went beyond where I wanted to go. But leave you with this principle. Mental health, the health of your thinking, your emotional health, your spiritual health, all of that is tied into, your physical health. That if we want to advance, that's something that we have to keep in mind, that all of those things are balanced together. And lastly, one of the things that we find in the book is translated Spiritual Diseases by Ibn Taymiyyah. One of the things is that characterization of spiritual diseases in much the same way that physical diseases were characterized. It's possible to advance beyond your own issues, but it has to be done in an almost scientific way, right? And so we leave on that note. Assalamu alaikum.